Good morning. My name is Lynn Donovan, and I am the theologian in residence at St. Andrews in Picton. So, I might be in the middle of a trilogy whose subject is time. 2 weeks ago, I shared with you the contents and thoughts of a book entitled Wintering: The Power of Rest and Retreat During Difficult Times. Last weekend, although it's not up on YouTube yet, it will be on Tuesday, good friend Larry Taylor talked about an invitation to sacred pauses and to rethink our days in terms not of routine, but in terms of ritual. And this morning with the circle of friends, we discussed the whole concept of time known as Jubilee. So let's just back up a bit. So the woman, now I forget the name of the woman who wrote the book entitled Wintering, reminded us that winter is not just a season of the creation, but it is also a season of our souls, and it is an invitation to back away from our lives, rest, retreat, treat ourselves with tenderness and kindness until that new burst of energy that resembles spring returns. Larry Taylor spoke to us last week about that invitation to Sabbath, invitation within the biblical text to rest for the purpose of renewing ourselves, but also to think of time differently. So as opposed to thinking about one day after another that we have to fill so that we aren't bored out of our minds, inviting us to see each day as the gift, the sacred gift, during which we participate in sacred practices that are not just sitting cross-legged in front of a candle. But for example, Larry's day begins with his basset hound insisting on being fed, and how that daily demand can be seen in terms of a larger invitation to participate in the community that is his home, a community where each one makes contributions and then each one experiences the value of those unique contributions, so that even feeding the dog, cleaning the cat litter is a means of participating in healthy community, and so is not just routine, but in fact, sacred practice. And so here's our third conversation about how I think this pandemic time is inviting us to rethink our understanding of time itself. So the Greeks had at least two words for time. One was chronos, which refers to chronological time. It is the time that is marked by seconds and minutes, hours, days, weeks, etc. And we have all been counting down the days of this pandemic, chronos. And then there's the word in Greek, kairos, which is a word that speaks more to the appointed time, or a way of bringing special purpose to time, understanding time as sacred. And the biblical testimony provides us with invitations to A, keep the Sabbath day, stop time, in fact, rest, think, renew. And then there is another invitation within the biblical text, and that is an invitation to have kind of a mega Sabbath every 50 years, an invitation provided to the people of Israel. Keep in mind that they were being invited with these instructions to recreate community that was an antithesis to the experience they left behind in slavery. So that's at one end of the continuum. And the people of God are invited to imagine the other end of the continuum, where we are creating communities that will restore right relationships, honor the sacred balance, both among people and nature, but that cosmic balance that we are part of as well. So this year of Jubilee recognized that left to their own devices, the human race would consistently slide back in its practices, particularly its economic practices, so that we were always close to enslaving again the most vulnerable. And those of us who, for example, have involved in conversations around fair trade know that our present economic system provides wealth for a large portion of the planet, but also enslaves a large portion as well. And so this invitation to a year of jubilee every 50 years was an invitation to release from captivity slaves and return the land to original families. So for example, if someone had fallen into debt and the only way they could pay the debt was to offer the land to the person to whom they were indebted, well, then that meant that they became slaves themselves, unable without the land to provide themselves with a livelihood. So it is an invitation to level the playing field again. Every 50 years, if you've lost your land, it gets returned to you. If you've become enslaved because of that, you are freed. And it was also a recognition that we wanted to level the playing field also for animals and children who were considered to be things that we owned back then, and for foreigners. So I know that some of us have been thinking, this giant pause that the pandemic has provided has in fact reinforced what we already knew, and that is that a large portion of our population has been enslaved, not just those in the developing world who are working in sweatshops or in sugarcane fields so that we can have cheap and accessible clothing and food, but also think about those people who are enslaved to two incomes in order to maintain a household, or the single mother who at the same time needs to raise her children, has to go out and work. Slavery takes many different forms. And so this sacred pause, and I would suggest that whenever the biblical tradition is inviting a sacred pause, it is always connected to an invitation to justice as well. It's not just so that we can back away from our responsibilities, have some time of peace and restoration, and then recover ourselves and see the path ahead in a new way. But it's also a way of insisting that that sacred pause is for the restoration of a larger balance, not just a personal balance. Let me conclude with a story about my father, Ever the Prophet, who in the 70s, when Saskatchewan was about to repeal its Sabbath laws, allowing the larger supermarkets to open on Sunday, my dad picked up his pen, wrote another article for the paper, suggesting that by repealing the Sabbath laws, we were just making more resources, money available to those large corporations that already had enough. And in fact, by keeping those supermarkets closed on Sundays, it is the small corner store that was able to thrive. And what my dad also suggested was that by opening the large supermarkets on Sunday, we were taking the food out of the mouths of our immigrant community, because it was our immigrant community by and large who were the owners of those small corner stores that got to have a bit of a leg up on Sunday when we weren't able to go to Safeway for the milk. So I have deeply appreciated the invitation throughout this pandemic season to think more intently about the question, what time is it? And our Judaic-Christian tradition suggests that it is always time to consider whether or not we as a human community are living in right relationship with one another, with the animals, and then with those very fragile ecosystems that are responsible for life on this planet. And let us hope that the lessons that we have learned through this most challenging time might facilitate kinder, more sustainable practices.